I promised you the next time we'll do this in the metaverse, but for today, we have a stellar panel with us to talk technology. Now, this is Tech Titans on stage. I am humbled, I am honored. The tech geek is going to ask you a few questions, and we are going to be looking forward to India at 100, because that's the theme of the event. Anant, let's dive right in. When we talk about what's happening around the world, and Microsoft's doing all sorts of innovative stuff here in India and across the world, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can identify which could make India the next global technology hub?
So I'm a little biased on this, but also passionate about it, and therefore I'm going to lead with that. I truly believe that India has the potential to be the data capital of the planet, and for a variety of reasons. Number one, I think we've got the best talent capability anywhere in the world. Only country that has more than $500,000 engineers coming on every year, and the IT services industry, both led by Indian giants and global giants, is leveraging that power already. So we've already harnessed that. Second, I think the innovation that is happening with the startup ecosystem is now changing the way even data is getting leveraged. Data has now become an asset class. It's no longer just something that you do work with. It is something that you also value very differently. So it is now changing the way data is looked at. And finally, I think if you look at the potential of the data creation that's happening, I was quite blown away when I realized this, that the data that we are generating on the planet in one single year now is equal to nearly all the data that was generated in human history till about 7 years back. So you are just accelerating that explosion of data creation, and then you combine that with the power of the cloud. There's so much more possible. So to me, I'll keep it simple. India at 100, data capital on the planet.
Mr. Singh?
Look, I think we have our biggest advantage is demographics, right? And our biggest challenge is demographics, right? Because what you've got is, we have the very favorable demographic, and we are living in a time where pace of change, whether you look at technology or business, is running faster than most of the world can cope up with. So I think, as Anant was saying, if we can use the powers of of technology, use the powers of digital reach, potentially metaverse in times to come, right? To make sure that we keep up our demographic with the skills that are going to be required to serve, what is, on the other hand, a consumer demographic, which is more digitally native than anywhere else in the world, we'll be in a good place.
Mr. Gurnani, while things have looked positive for the last couple of years for the IT sector and the tech sector here in India, we're seeing what's happening in the West, and a lot of clients out there are perhaps bracing for a recession. When we talk about what's happening back over here in India, is there some sort of a corollary sort of effect where we're seeing Indian tech firms also bracing for the impact of what happens globally?
So, Ayush, before I answer that question, I just want to, dream with Anant and Piyush about, what India would be when we are 100 when it comes to technology and innovation. To me, the pandemic was the best eye-opener for me, that Dr. Krishna Ila produced a vaccine which was made in India, created in India. And then we had one of the world's largest manufacturing facility with the Serum India. So I do believe that both of these actually represent what India would be, 25 years from now. On one end, technology R&D would define the way businesses will be built out of India. Number two is that India's prowesses of building things on scale is what will come in through the Poonawalla kind of enterprises. So I think as long as we can remember the two words, the Vigyan or the scale, I think we would be in the right track for 25 years from now. in a lot of ways, yeah, I mean, India at times, when it comes to the economic situation, reality is, I think we are overreacting to US going into recession. I mean, most of us who have traveled in the recent past know that you don't get an airline seat, you don't get a hotel, you don't get a restaurant booking. And everywhere, wherever you go, they are hiring. I mean, how do you define recession? So, and yes, if there is a war, Russia and Ukraine, which is happening right in Europe, I mean, yes, there will be some impact. So, a slowdown need not be read as recession. Number two, India cannot be isolated from the global waves. We might boast of whatever captive consumption, but the reality is that the global waves also define. I mean, you hear Honorable Commerce Minister's speech, he is all the time talking about exports. I mean, he's not going to export to Indian domestic consumption. I mean, that consumption is going to happen somewhere in the world. And my belief is the more we integrate with the global trade, the better off we are. And at this stage, I would not be pessimistic.
Again, if I can add, I mean, look, when we're in a strange situation where a lot of the economic recession is inflationary in nature, right? Which means what? That a whole lot of the world economy needs to digitize even faster to serve that hyper demand that CP just spoke about, right? So from that perspective, we find ourselves in a very good place as one of the innovative hubs of the world, because we need to drive that rapid digitization of supply chains, rapid uplift of and scaling of manufacturing, with parts of the world getting out of reach for rest of the market, in order to ensure that we can calm down that inflation. And the answer to that will continue to lie in level of a rapid digitization. So from that perspective, I'm less concerned right now.
Mr. Singh, you alluded to the M word, and there's two M words we'll be using in this conversation. The first one being the metaverse. And Accenture is doing some very fascinating things in the metaverse, because you're talking about a lot of these top companies around the world and then hiring, retaining, and then delighting young millennial or Gen Z talent with companies like yours. Accenture is actually hiring a lot of them, and their orientations are happening in the metaverse. Is there a need now that the top tech companies around the world and in India feel to adapt and tweak their older practices to really, like I said, retain and delight younger talent?
Yeah, look, I mean, for us, metaverse became a necessity. There was lockdowns, there was inability to get our people into our offices, and we had this unprecedented demand that we were faced with, right? So the only way we could bring our people and give them that experience of the Accenture brand was to bring them into metaverse, right? So we created this Accenture metaverse called the Nth Floor, and we completely did an induction of close to 100,000 people in the metaverse, which is about, I think, a record by a long means. But then if you start to look to the future, don't forget that we are about to inherit a whole generation that will be metaverse native. Right? So what was a necessity at that time, from tomorrow is going to become a necessity of different type, right? This was a necessity of giving any brand experience to our whole lot of people. Now it will be, if I don't give them that experience, they will not associate with me at all, right? And that will be also the challenge for a whole lot of corporations, because right now we are all, I mean, I was saying earlier to Anant, we are in that zone of, do I have an, iPhone app, right? We all went through that phase, us, the older people who have seen that. The younger generation is born native in the metaverse, right? So the experiential offer that organizations will need to make in the future will be both, will be multiverse, right? So that's why, we are investing quite heavily in that space to be ready to offer the market that experience.
So is Microsoft. And I think Microsoft has a very interesting interpretation of the metaverse. From what all of us on the media side really interpret, is gaming. And you marry the two, Microsoft's vision with the Activision deal, and Vision and Activision, and then you marry that with the burgeoning Indian gaming space. Is that a marriage that's waiting to happen, Mr. Maheshwari?
So as Piyush was speaking, and he spoke about the digital native or the mobile native people who are going to now sort of drive a lot of the work going forward. I went back in history and I said when India was at 50, I was overjoyed because I got this device in my hand that I thought unlocked everything in the world for me, which was the mobile phone. It's the first mobile phone I ever got at that point in time. And it completely changed my paradigm of what work was. But I had never, through all my prior life, all my education, I never had that kind of a thing in my hand. So for me, I'm not mobile native. I became very used to the mobile over the last 25 years. Today, if you look at a generation today, they are AI native, artificial intelligence native. For them, it's very normal to expect that there will be a recommendation that will be given to you on what you should do or what options you have, and there is no fear of the unknown in any form that this generation has. And this generation is also gaming in the metaverses that exist today. So if you really look at the metaverses that exist at scale today, they are in the gaming worlds, and many a time you'll in fact have a very different conversation with the parent as to they're in that metaverse, they're not in the real world. So you got to manage that too. Now that generation, as they grow and they come to environments that we all were working through over the last couple of years, they will become very much native metaverse. And therefore, where you're going to see the maximum infusion first of a 2D metaverse, two-dimensional, and then three-dimensional metaverse is in platforms like Teams, wherein a lot of us are working today. And then you're able to think about this whole concept of hybrid work. And to simplify hybrid work, at times we think of hybrid only as presence. Are you present physically or virtually? And that's the only hybrid that we work with. But ask somebody in the tech industry, in the services domain, they work 24/7. So there is also a hybrid of time, asynchronous or synchronous. Now you combine the time dimension with the physical dimension, that's where metaverse really plays. You can have your avatar play asynchronously, and you can play virtually in the real world. So a lot of elements coming together, and that's what's going to define the future of work.
You know, for a lot of people watching, they're going to go back and watch maybe a Marvel Comics movie and figure out what time variance is all about, because that's what tech geeks are really waiting for. That's what the culmination of the metaverse perhaps is. But you know, there's a quote, a recent quote by Satya Nadella, which really stuck in my head, which was that digital technology, and I think he was alluding to the cloud, is a deflationary force in an inflationary economy, right? I think given what's happening around the world, this is something that becomes very significant, Mr. Maheshwari.
So I'll maybe make it, we all have to do more with less. It's the first time in the history of about 400 years now that the OECD countries will have less working class population than prior years. So therefore, there is less resource to work with. And technology is the only capability that can come in to create that additional growth that the world has to drive. And a lot of the tech majors around the world are helping that movement. The second bit, if I take it down to India, and this is not about just the OECD countries, there are at least 400 to 500 million people in the country who will need a different kind of skilling capability, the ability to do more because they've done their formal education, they've done maybe 10 years of their working life, but they need to keep getting new skills. How can they keep getting that new skill on a daily basis? It's with the help of artificial intelligence in their hands. Right. And therefore, doing more with less is not just a developed world problem, it's also a problem of the entire world, but it's also an opportunity because technology already exists to do that.
From the metaverse, Mr. Gurnani, we're going to come to the other M in the room, and that is something that has been trending all over social media and, of course, on our news channels, which happens to be moonlighting. Now, I know a lot of IT firms and tech companies have different responses and reactions to it. What is your take? Where do you stand on the concept for our audience of a lot of tech workers who've post-pandemic started taking up secondary jobs, maybe traditionally at night, to earn a secondary source of income. Mr. Gurnani?
I mean, I think your friends in Gujarat would say only their life has been legitimized. So, I mean, you meet anybody in Gujarat, he was always doing two jobs. So, I mean, I don't
Sometimes
know.
two, three, four also.
I mean, that I don't know. I know you are superhuman, but, my views have been very simple on this. Number one, I think many a times we overemphasize on no event. I don't think moonlighting is that rampant. There will always be a few cases. But I don't think it is that rampant because let's face it, most of us have efficiency and productivity targets and they're measurable. It is not that you just put it in, I mean, thanks to all the automation, artificial intelligence. I mean, you live in a world where a certain amount of discipline, time management exists. So as far as I am concerned, somebody meets the productivity and efficiency norms, and if he wants to make an extra buck, as long as he's not committing a fraud and he is not, doing something which is against the values and the ethics of the company, I have no problem. Frankly, I'm going to probably make it a policy that if you want to do it, I mean, sure, but be open about it. Share with us.
So the headline is CP Gurnani is pro-hustle culture for millennials.
I mean, the headline, Ayush, is that if you are a millennial and if you can do two jobs, you are a superhero.
I think that deserves a round of applause. It's refreshing to hear that. I think, Mr. Singh, you wanted to add something.
I mean, fun aside, look, you got to understand that, there is some exceptions of that, but this is also a period of massive empathy for our workforces. It hasn't been easy for our workforces to be locked up in a room, adopt new models of digital collaboration while suffering socially, while suffering personally, dealing with individual health, right? And yet delivering, what probably the most rapid transformation in the world, right? So yes, there will be exceptions and they will create some but for me, at the heart of it right now, we are going through a period of deep gratitude because our workforces are emerging from delivering for us value that is exceptional through personal circumstances that were even more exceptional. Right? So that is the primary takeaway that I would request.
So you sort of segued into my next point, which is then how do we address this, right? I'm sure technology has a solution. When we're talking about hybrid workforces, we alluded to what the millennials want. The mindset is we're cool with being digital nomads and working from anywhere. If you're cool with it, like Mr. Gurnani is, as long as we can be efficient, productivity doesn't go down, and there's no ethical issues with doing whatever we do. But since you did mention another point about how we can get this done, is there a solution on the technology end where we can really sustain hybrid work culture?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, first of all, technology is the second aspect. The first aspect is culture and values, right? Mr. Gurnani said that earlier. So first thing is to ensure that we understand that as humans, we have been used to a model of, in-present physical working, right? We dealt with that rapid change through stealth during the period of crisis of the pandemic. We now need to, usher in a slow change of making sure that people adopt this model of working. Secondly, of course, technology is there, right? But it requires structural investment. Don't do Band-Aid. Don't expect by throwing in a few telephony models, online working models, you'll solve that, right? I mean, Anant and their team have done a great job of giving us a lot of the digital platforms for collaboration. We are the largest digital collaborator in the world, right? But it requires structural change and structural investment, right? right? It will otherwise, I always go back to my example. When it all started and the lockdowns happened, I was offered to do a dinner over a virtual platform with some people. Now that is a proper band-aid, right? Nobody wants to see me eat on a big screen with anybody, right? So that don't try to push analog models into digital world, right? Introduce digital collaboration, do it structurally, and and that's the world we are going to be in. There's no going back from it.
Anant, do you agree? I think Microsoft does have several solutions in that space.
So,
When we talk about work and culture, so to speak.
absolutely. So let me just first completely uh, reiterate what Piyush said about culture. It's the most important glue that every one of our organizations have in being able to bring new people on board, in really inspiring them to do a lot more, and then grow themselves in that whole process. So culture is extremely important. And how do you then imbibe that culture in an environment where a person may say, I just got a new machine by joining a new company, and I'm looking at that screen, everything else is the same for me. And there have been instances where this person may have worked for 2 years in the company and then changed the machine, moved on to the next company. So how do you bring culture to operate in that context? I think that's where hybrid is very important to understand. The second part is, we can never underestimate human connection and human empathy. Just cannot. It is, at least I may be a little bit old world in that, but I remember in all my apprenticeship that happened, I observed people. I was around them. I felt what people were feeling. And that emotion was very important for me to grow in everything that I've been able to do. And I see that ask also coming from the millennial group. I was very recently in a group in our company, and I was asking this question, hey, listen, let's talk about the hybrid work. And there were lots of opinions, and everybody would find their own parameters. But there was this group of very young professionals who basically said, I'm done with 2 years of college, done completely remote. I've come into the workforce. I want to meet everyone every day. And to me, that was a very refreshing sort of comment from this group, saying, I really want that human connection in my workplace. So please bring a lot more people in. While there were others who said, listen, yeah, I'll come in 2 or 3 days. I will not come in for another 2 or 3 days into the office. So I think that's how it's going to work. We're going to find, for every person, for every group of people, for every work situation, it's likely to be a different solution. And that is going to change over time. So I don't think there is a dogma around hybrid work. We should really work with data, and we should work with real situations to evolve with them. Technology will support and continue to evolve.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly, my colleague who runs our consulting business, Anurag, is here, and Anurag and I met all our young graduates, and the overwhelming thing was, please get me office. Right, some of them said, "Please get me away from my parents," but hopefully none of their parents are watching. But the overwhelming response was, "Get me to work." So I think, again, see the point that Anant made, which was two things I say. See, where technology helps is you look at the analytics of what your workforce is saying, because you cannot stereotype it by demographic. Right, that's number one. And the second part is the human touch means, in a hybrid world, the level of trust that you put in your workforce, and the cultural value has to be amplified a few times. Because earlier your trust was, can I walk on the floor and see everybody doing what they're doing, and you get a sense. Now you've got to have that belief in your people that I don't need to look at my people, right? I have that trust, and they need to have that return of authority and trust that the organization believes in them.
Fascinating. Mr. Gurnani, the human touch is important. Is that what you're also going to share? But I'll ask you a corollary to that question as well, which is, when you look at all of these conversations about hybrid work, work from anywhere, how do you ensure culture, top down, the growth mindset that they talk about at Microsoft, which I find very cool, unlearning to learn? How do we ensure some of these things at the top tech firms?
I think the fundamental message that you have and all of us have picked up is, youngsters want to come to work. To them, that interaction is important. Reality is that hybrid, when it evolved, it was a necessity. I mean, there was no choice. The second part is, I think we all also need to evolve with the time. And what is that evolution is that the technology has kept pace. Technology did not let us down, neither in data security, nor in communication, or in a virtual platforming, virtual product development. What we all have missed is the emotion and the empathy. What we have missed is that competitive spirit. What we have missed is that brain spa that happens within the people. I think, personally, my assessment is people have predicted 50-50. I think it is going to be more 70% of your time would be spent on the shop floor or on the work, on the offices. Offices will get redesigned. Offices will become a place where you come to interact. It is no longer going to be about cubes. So, but that is an evolution, but it is more about 70-30 or 75-25.
I can go on and on, but in the interest of time, I'm going to come to each of my esteemed guests and now look forward, because the theme is India at 100. So we want to get your thoughts on what are those top trends, or make it simple, one technology trend that you are looking forward to. And maybe 25 years is a very long time in the technology world. So let's talk about 5 years or the next decade. Mr. Singh, let's start with you.
Look, I mean, I would say, obviously, the metaverse, the multiverse existence, it taking forms of not just experiential usage, but potentially digital asset and digital asset ownership. And the moment you get into that space, then a whole lot of further disruption opens up, right? I was saying, I think about 50% of global monetary authorities are now contemplating or about to release, digital currencies. So that you get into a space of digital ownership, digital asset space, and digital currency. And then you're talking, I can go on driving that disruption further and further, right? So I think that is definitely a space to watch for, because again, that combined with the with the metaverse native, which is next generation to digitally native, consumers coming on board could be a big disruption to watch in a 5-year period.
Spot on. I'm glad that the conversation now has moved away from crypto and we're talking about the true benefits of blockchain, Web3, the ecosystem, and the metaverse as well.
It is scary when you start to think that your child may be spending more on a Nike shoe in a different verse than a physical shoe, where I think already is spending too much money on the physical Nike shoe.
Fair enough, Mr. Maheshwari.
So I said it earlier in the beginning, India becoming the data capital of the world. But I think more than that, if I just have to think about what is going to change, the one big megatrend that happened during the pandemic is we all got very aware about trust. See, people will only use technology that they trust. And one of the biggest questions that at least we lead with inside Microsoft is not what technology can do, but what technology should do. And that is a very important element that's going to get defined as artificial intelligence gets developed, because you have to take out inherent biases. You've got to take out all the use cases that you don't want on the planet, and how you develop that going forward is going to be very big. So I think how trust starts becoming talked about a lot more, and technology comes in to support that trust, is going to be the biggest driver of that end game, at least of becoming the data capital on the planet.
And incorporating the tenets of privacy and security and stuff like that.
Trust has many elements: privacy, security, resilience, consistency. All of those are part of trust.
Spot on. Mr. Gurnani, we've saved your comment to end this spectacular session with.
Thank you, Ayush.
And Mrs. Singh said it without the mic, save the best for last.
Thank you, Ayush. From my point of view, India at 100 years, today all of us sitting here, all three of us, represent what is called digital transformation. I think India would be business transformation. And just to say, let's take example. Let's assume we were solving a problem called sustainability. What would you do? You would do more remote operations. You will look at productivity and efficiency. You will try and measure every input and output. And if you were putting it together to look at alternate means, whether the alternate mean is to find the new source of palladium or an alternate way of solving supply chain or a cyber security, one problem resolution sustainability leads to technology in a very different way. And I think India at 100 will be known for business transformation.
There you go. We will end on that note. Gentlemen, thank you so much for such a fascinating chat. And thank you guys so much for joining us as well.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.